everybody. Good afternoon, and thank you all for having me. Thank you to Councilman Kramer for the kind introduction. I was talking with him backstage a little bit. My wife and I both love the city of Louisville and have spent a lot of time there. So thank you for being here. It means a lot, and thanks for the kind words. And I'd say to all of you, whenever I was in the Senate and I welcomed a group from Ohio, and I know you guys represent the entire country or cities and municipalities all over the country, I would always just say, enjoy the town because it is your city. And I think that Washington is a beautiful place. It's a beautiful place to spend a few days. I know you guys have some work to do, but I also think it's important to get out there and see the people's city. It was built with your tax dollars. I think these incredible buildings and museums are supported by all of you and, of course, by all the people that you represent. And so I hope you enjoy your time in Washington, D.C. So I know you're all busy, and I know it's never easy to come here to Washington, especially on a Monday. So I appreciate the effort involved in getting here, and I also appreciate the mission of this conference. The work you all do back home is extremely important. Most Americans, of course, they interact with their state and local governments far more regularly than they do their federal government, and that's the way it's supposed to be. That's the way the Constitution sets it up. We know that good government starts at the local level. So while those of us in Washington certainly take up most of the press attention, and we do that whether we want to or not, I want to acknowledge the enormous impact local governments have on the lives of our great American citizens. Now, the Trump administration believes in the wisdom of federalism and leaving local issues to local officials. But we all also recognize the importance of supporting and collaborating with all of you because so many of the issues that you deal with, of course, implicate local issues, but state issues and federal issues as well. And one area of shared interest between President Trump and I think every single person in this room is the importance of providing good housing for our citizens at a reasonable and affordable cost. And I have to say, I'm hard-pressed to think of a time in my 40 years of life where it's been so hard for normal American citizens to afford a home. Even renting a home has become a challenge, or worse yet, fallen completely out of reach for so many of our families. I was talking with a relative a couple of years ago, and she just made kind of an offhanded observation. As a younger person than I am, she was looking to buy her first home and just mentioned that when her parents were growing up, they could afford a nice home on a single middle class.
This is actually a common conversation that people from my generation lament about, is the fact that home ownership has become what I would say, or what a lot of people would consider to be unattainable. Soaring interest rates, just our generation seems to have been priced out of the opportunity to buy homes, which as we all know isn't just home ownership, roof over your head. It's stock, it's money, it's asset, it's a growing asset. People pass down their homes to their kids. People may or may not sell their home off once it appreciates and use it for a college fund for a kid. Like, there's so many opportunities that come from home ownership that, again, a lot of people in my generation have been unfortunately priced out of. Or that's the narrative. That's the feeling. That is the overall consensus, that it just feels like it's become something that has been pushed further out of our reach, unfortunately.
Class income, and she was sort of mentioning this as a sorrowful thing. She was sad that wasn't true for her generation, and I think all of us
I'm 28, by the way,
in this room, certainly including me, have a little bit more work to do, I think, to make housing more affordable. I want to talk about that because I think it's the issue where our interests in some ways are most aligned with the people in this room. I read recently that the average income it takes to buy a new house is nearly 2 times the average salary of your typical American family. Not the average American worker, but the combined incomes of a husband and wife. And that's just not acceptable or sustainable in the United States of America. We want Americans to be able to afford the American dream of home ownership because we know that when people own their homes, it makes them a stakeholder. It makes them a stakeholder in their neighborhoods, in their cities, and ultimately, of course, in this country that all of us love so much. We want our citizens to feel that investment in their own country, and it's hard. It's hard to feel that investment if you feel like you can't even own a slice of it, even if that's what you want to do. Now, on a more basic level, we don't want people living paycheck to paycheck. We don't want them to make trade-offs between a trip to the grocery store and meeting next month's rent. Because even if you don't yet own a home, or even if you don't ever want to own a home, the knowledge that if you work hard and spend wisely, eventually you'll be able to afford a nice place to live, that goes, I think, a very long way to giving people a sense that they belong here and a sense that they have a stake in the future. Now, there are some important reasons why that belief is dwindling among Americans today. And a lot of it, of course, comes from the historic inflation that this country has dealt with over the last 4 years. Now, under the previous administration, get a little bit political, the cost of a median price home in America more than doubled, and that was just in 4 years. And if your salary didn't keep pace with inflation and rise 20%, your buying power took even a bigger hit. And of course, if you think about this, if the price of a home doubles and the price and your actual salary doesn't double, then you're a lot worse.
You've effectively been priced out of home ownership. I mean, just as simply as that. The prices of home doubled and your salary stayed the same and decreased in some cases. Like, bro, this is this is not a friendly economy when it comes to home buyers. Maybe as a seller, you're getting off, but as a buyer or a potential buyer, it's a rough market.
Off. And we know that most Americans did not see their salary double over the last.
And even as a seller, you only have certain customers. You only have a certain market. Because again, I mean, first time home buyers, a lot of us or a lot of potential first time home buyers are going off of the salary. They're going off of maybe husband and wife salary, trying to get a family home, first time, something to house them and their 1 or 2 kid. So that's the person that, due to raising inflation or rising inflation, hyperinflation, that's the one who's suffering. Now, if you got a few real estate properties under your belt, like, you ain't worried, you know, work around, you know how to get in. But if you're a first time home buyer, these are the people that are being affected by this hyperinflation and salaries and market, the pay in the market being really not increasing at all.
4 years. So it's no surprise that home sales hit a 30-year low in 2024. Now, another reason for the elevation.
To that point about home sales reaching a 30-year low, like, bro, everybody needs, the market needs homes to be sold. Buyers need homes, obviously, for many reasons, and sellers need to be able to sell their homes. So nobody wins when that's the case. Nobody truly wins. Like, yes, sellers are probably going to have the advantage because there's always going to be somebody, a potential customer. But again, the ones that are truly affected, the people that are truly at the bottom here and are the most affected, are potential first time home buyers who are trying to get a home for themselves, their families, their kids, and start that generational wealth, or start to try and build or attain generational wealth, or even just the idea of being able to do so. These are the people that are being priced out and ultimately affected.
Elevating costs comes down to zoning. And the reality, as you all know, is that zoning is an area where federal authority is actually quite limited. And I'm sure none of you want the federal government in the business of mandating how cities and towns handle local laws, and that's certainly not what we want to do either. But I would ask everyone in this room is to be good partners with us, and certainly partners with your citizens, and think about how we can improve the costs of the costs of housing for our citizens. And I think one of the ways that we're going to have to do that is by being a little bit smarter about our local zoning rules. And in particular, when I think about zoning, I can't help but think about it without, of course, the communities that I know best, which are those that I represented in the state of Ohio. And, Columbus, Ohio in particular, I assume we've got some Columbus people here.
Hey, shout
And,
out.
Columbus is a boom town. in so many ways. I've got, relatives and family members who live there, who love Columbus. It's a magnet because it's had so much economic development. But one of the things that I worry about when I look at a city like Columbus or, Miami, which became a boom town during the COVID years, is the unaffordability of housing. And we've got to fix that. If we actually want these places to be magnets, not just for jobs and investment, but also the dreams of our young people, we've got to actually make it easier to build homes. And in particular, I think the city of Austin has done a pretty interesting job, because in Austin, you saw this massive increase of people moving in. The cost of housing skyrocketed, but then Austin implemented some pretty smart policies, and that brought down the cost of housing. And it's one of the few major American cities where you see the cost of housing leveling off or even coming down. Now, the Trump administration has taken important steps to make building cheaper and to boost the supply of housing. Now, of course, it's going to take time, but this is a day one issue for our entire team from the president on down. On his first day in office, the president issued an executive order making it a priority to bring down prices for new buyers. Now, part of that will come from slashing needless regulations, which, according to some estimates, account for about 25% of a new single-family build today. We've also seen Secretary Turner, our great Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, he's working hard on this issue, cutting some of the Biden rules at HUD that hike costs and shift the decision-making from local governments to Washington, D.C. And Secretaries Burgum and Wright, and certainly Administrator Zeldin at the EPA, are putting in important work to bring down the cost of energy, which is, of course, a critical input to the cost of building a home, to say nothing, of course, of heating one and keeping its lights on. But I actually want to focus on something a little bit different, because I think this is one of the areas where what the Trump administration can do and has done is going to be one of the major drivers of bringing down costs of housing. Now, local zoning, regulations, the cost of energy, these things are about the supply of housing. How do we get more houses out there to be built? But I think it's important to talk about the demand side of the housing market. And so much of what we're doing in the Trump administration when it comes to the immigration issue is framed about law enforcement, about reducing fentanyl coming into our communities. And that is true. That is a big part of why we're doing what we're doing at the border. But when we talk about housing and why costs are so high, we don't talk enough about demand. And one of the drivers of increased housing demand, we know, is that we've got a lot of people over the last 4 years who have come into the country illegally. And that's something we have to work on if we want to meaningfully reduce the cost of housing too. Now, just think about this. If you allow 20 million people to compete with American citizens for the cost of homes, you are going to have a large and frankly completely preventable spike in the demand for housing.
Yep.
And that is what we, of course, have seen, because while we made it
We've seen that issue play out in Springfield, Ohio. It was almost a microcosm for what was happening and taking place across the country. Migrants flooded in, and people who have been in these homes for generations, I mean, generations, 2-3+ generations, were ultimately priced out of their homes. Migrants came in, the government subsidized half or more than half of their rent in a lot of cases, and renters were able to raise the price. They knew that the government was essentially going to be paying the bills. So a lot of times you got 10 houses on the street and 6 of them are occupied by migrants, which the government is again subsidizing half or more of their rent. Now the other property owners on the rest of the street feel like they can raise the price of rent. So now you've been paying whatever price you've been paying for the past few years, the past 5 years, and all of a sudden your rent jumps up $300-$400. It's insane. And again, that was happening in Springfield, Ohio, which was just a microcosm of the issue across America. And this is exactly what JD Vance is speaking on right now.
a little bit hard to build homes in this country over the last 4 years, we've also unfortunately made it way too easy for people to compete against American citizens for the precious homes that are in our country to begin with. Now, I'll say this, it's actually not just an American problem either. If you go to Canada, where because of their laws and regulations, they've seen a massive increase in the number of people who have come into their country. You go to the United Kingdom, you go across the world, And you see a very consistent relationship between a massive increase in immigration and a massive increase in housing prices. And we have to be honest about that. Well,
And obviously you got some counter protesters in the crowd screaming out, but it's funny enough, they waited until he spoke on immigration, which is an issue that actually does affect people. They waited until he spoke out on that to choose the time to yell and protest. Funny enough. Funny enough. Nothing else this man said did they counteract or did they object to, but when he spoke on immigrants, they was quick to speak up.
I see one of our nice representatives out here wants to actually, I guess, continue to flood the country with illegal immigrants, making your communities and citizens unaffordable. But ma'am, with all respect, one of the reasons why we're doing what we're doing is because we want to make it more affordable for Americans to live. That is one of the reasons why we're doing what we're doing. Now, last week, I visited the southern border, and we decided to check in on what's going on there at the southern border. And of course, like I said earlier, you often hear about immigration enforcement as about crime and about drug trafficking, and that is a big part of it. I was at Eagle Pass, and I was talking to local border control down there, and they told me that in just a matter of weeks, their small part of the border had gone from 1,500 daily encounters to less than 30. And again, that's in a matter of weeks. That's just a simple matter of common sense border enforcement. That matters. Thank you.
And applause is necessary. They didn't even really have to do much. They didn't even really have to do much. Trump got elected. Obviously, certain strategies and policies were announced, right? ICE is doing their thing. Border Patrol has been emboldened to do their job now. But beyond that, not much has changed beyond the current leadership. I mean, scroll back a month or two ago, he said that area was having 1,500 crossovers to today, they're having 30 or less. That is insane. And it's all only could be acclimated to Trump being in office. It has everything to do with Trump being in office in the current administration. And there's no nonsense policy on immigration. Like, imagine you got a leader who actually cares, you got a leader who actually does the job, and see what happens. Just see what happens. Open your eyes and see what happens.
And let's talk about why it matters. I mentioned housing, but one of the things I heard down there, I was talking to the mayor in that community, and he said it's incredibly stressful on local resources. It's stressful on their local hospitals. It's stressful on their local schools to have this massive increase. And so while, look, I recognize there's a diversity of opinions here, clearly there is, I also think it's important to be honest about those disagreements, to acknowledge those disagreements, but to say that the reason why we care about border security is because we want your communities to be safer, we want them to be more affordable, we want there to be less drugs in our country, and we want your citizens to be able to live the American dream. It is the birthright of every single one of our citizens, and we're going to fight for it every single day. So, with all due respect for some of the disagreements and opinion, I'd say we welcome disagreements. We want to talk about those disagreements, but we also have to respect the law in the United States of America. And I can tell. And I can tell you that, yes, of course, you're going to disagree with some of our policies. That's okay. Come and tell us when you disagree with our policies, and we'll have a conversation about it. Maybe don't shout it in front of 2,000 people. I can't even hear what you're saying, sir. But importantly, on this question of immigration, we have to recognize that, yes, you can disagree with some of the laws that are in place. You can disagree with the enforcement of those laws. You can even vote for people who want to change those laws. But while we have immigration laws on the books, we will enforce them, and we expect our local municipalities to help us. So it will be the policy of the Trump administration to enforce the nation's laws, and it will be the policy of the Trump administration to say that it is not up to local cities to choose which federal laws that they're going to enforce. It's important. We can't do immigration enforcement with sanctuary cities. We've got to have everybody respecting the law, and that is going to be one of the major policy focuses, of course, of the Trump administration, and it already has been. And I want to just say one final point about this issue of housing and of the strains that immigration and illegal immigration in particular put on our housing stock. We know from economists that blue collar folks are often those who face the biggest cuts in wages and in services when you have communities overwhelmed by illegal immigration. I come from a blue collar family. And I think one of the main drivers is that we need to be able to give our citizens, black, white, or whatever skin color, whatever belief system that they have, if you are an American citizen, you deserve to have a government at the local, city, and federal level that fights for the American dream for you. And we've seen And we've seen, yes, over the Biden administration, but let's be honest, over 40 years of American policy, we've seen a lot of our blue collar Americans, urban and rural, struggling to afford a home, struggling to raise their kids in safe communities, struggling to look to the future with hope.
And affordability has been an issue that's plagued us. Now, hopefully, some of the economic policies of the current administration can counteract that. But yes, we started off this video by saying, I mean, I'm 28 and I can speak for a lot of people in my generation. We lament over the fact that we feel like we've been priced out of home ownership. It's like an unattainable, thing for a lot of us. First time home buyers. I know there's a lot of initiatives, there's a lot of loans out there, whatever, what have you, but just through inflationary rates, lending rates being just absorbently high, all of that stuff has a lot of people in my generation and around my age feeling like the general consensus is like home ownership is just not something that we can afford right now. And it's sad because we all know home ownership is one of the foundational ways of building generational wealth, not only for you, but for your family. I mean, think about it. It could be a roof over your head for 20, 30, 40 plus years. It can be passed down to a family member, a child. At a certain point in time, you could sell it, maybe to pay for a college tuition. There's so many things you can do with home ownership. I mean, it could be a building block. You could start with one home, work your way up to another. There's so many things you can do. And it's just a sad opportunity that seems to have been lost for people in my generation.
And optimism. And so, with all respect for policy disagreements, I think that one thing that unites us in this room is that we want to give our blue collar people in the United States of America a shot at the American dream again. We may disagree about how exactly to do it.
Shit, think about it, bro. I've talked to my mom about this. I've talked to people a little bit older. Like, it's gonna sound crazy, but it was almost like a fire sale on homes at a certain point in time, depending on what city you were in, obviously the market, what have you. But affordability of homes was never like this. You could get a home on an honest salary. You could work at the local plant or the local factory and afford a home. Like, you didn't have to sell an arm and a leg or, start an OnlyFans or anything crazy to be able to afford a home. You could get it off of 40 hours at your local factory. Yes, it used to be a time and a day and age in America where you could get by just by doing blue collar work. Not only that, you could provide for your family, but put a house over their head. And not by renting, not off of borrowing, but a home that you owned, something that you actually had to your name. Right? If anything happens, I can sell this for some money. Once I don't need it anymore, I can pass it down to my kids. Just like it's actually sad that that opportunity has been lost for a lot of people.
Do it, but let's do it together. Let's fight for our people together, and let's reinvigorate the American dream for the American citizen once again. And let me close here with just an acknowledgement here that I know you guys have some of the hardest jobs in government, Democrat, Republican, or nonpartisan. You guys are the ones, of course, who fix the potholes. You guys are the ones that make sure our local police have the funding that they need. Our local firefighters are able to do the incredible job that they do. So I just want to let you know, from the Trump administration, from the president, the vice president, and everybody else, we respect what you do. We're impressed by you. We think you guys are doing a great job, and we want to make sure that you have a presidential administration that is making your lives easier and not harder. So please consider our administration one with an open door. Please come to us when you have issues. Even if you don't like what we're
Hey,
doing on the policy, you guys have got to be able to come
good.
and talk to us. So keep doing a great job. Keep doing what you're doing. Enjoy the rest of your time in Washington.
I like that open door policy. Consider this administration one that cares about hearing our frustrations, complaints, and critiques. And I think that should be something that we could all unify under. Whether you voted for Trump and Vance or not, we all have our our critiques. Obviously, people who didn't vote for him more than the people who did, but we should all be able to unify in the fact that hey, these are our guys going forward. Let's hold them accountable. Let's unify under the fact that we all need them to be the best leaders